Hello and welcome to season 4 of Travel Stories with Moush. So if you love the world around you and you love exploring different landscapes, cultures, cuisines and cities, then you are in the right place because in every episode of the podcast, I'll be talking to an incredible travel enthusiast who will take us on a fascinating journey around the world by sharing their travel stories. Before we jump onto today's episode, I just want to take a quick moment to say a huge thank you to all our audience who have supported us throughout. But there is also a huge number of you out there who listen to our podcast or watch it on YouTube, but who have not subscribed yet. So may I please request you to hit on that subscribe button because it really helps us to continue doing what we are doing and bring you these incredible travel stories from around the globe. So welcome to season 4 once again, everyone. This is episode 29 and I couldn't be more excited because not only is this the first episode of the new season, but I'm also joined by someone who I have been wanting to interview for a very long time. Omar Samra is an adventurer, an entrepreneur, an internationally renowned speaker whose life in travel is extremely inspiring. Omar has conquered some of the toughest terrains and draws deep life lessons from his journeys and was also training to become an astronaut. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, Omar. Like I said, we've waited long enough for you to be here. So thank you so much for being here. Now, there's so many things that you dabble in. I mean, you've got so many accolades up your sleeve. You're the first Egyptian to summit Everest. You have summited all the 7 summits in every continent. You have skied to the North Pole and the South Pole, and the list goes on. But what is this urge to go for these extreme adventures that you have? I mean, do you find something that keeps calling you back to adventure all the time?
Yeah, I mean, well, thanks for having me, first of all.
Oh, you're so welcome.
It's lovely to meet you. I think it's the sense of curiosity that I've had since I was a child, and I've always been gravitating towards the unknown. I think it all started for me at a very young age. I grew up in a very sheltered environment. So I was the kid who, like if I stood under the AC, you're gonna get sick, or like, don't be too close to the ledge, that kind of thing. I always joke with my mother that she ended up creating a monster because I kind of sort of rebelled like the other way. My first experience was when my parents sent me to a camp in Switzerland. I got to see my first mountain, first time I'd ever seen snow, climbed a very small mountain and fell in love with it, with the beauty of the mountains and the sense of peace that I found there. And I think that was the starting point, and that sort of, everything else that came from that spark, essentially.
Yeah, it's so ironic, right? Like you lived this sheltered life and then you went on to become this adventurer that you are today. But of course, now to start with the very first question of the podcast, where are you taking us on an adventure today?
I could pick so many, but the one that comes to mind now is my last trip to Antarctica. This was in 2018, but I was really fascinated with the idea of becoming the first to do something, not the first Egyptian to do something, but to do a world first. And so when I went to Antarctica, when I went the last time, I hope it's not the last time, but my last trip, I wanted to climb a mountain that had never been climbed before, which also really spoke to my passion about space. I ended up climbing 3 mountains that had never been climbed before with a fellow climber from Alaska. And when we came back to the camp, we were told that because we'd climbed these mountains, we could name them. And I didn't even know that. And so I ended up...
So sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you. So these 3 mountains were never climbed by any human before?
Yeah.
And you got to name them?
Yes. So I named one Mount Samra after my family name. The other one was Mount Tila after my daughter, and then Mount Marwa, which is after my late wife.
Okay.
It was kind of having named those mountains in this really pristine, beautiful place that's untouched by, everything, all the pollution and everything that, in our world today. It was sort of like it was almost like a very romantic or very a beautiful way to kind of capture that story.
You've climbed so many mountains, but what was different this time around, and why was it was obviously special? It finally became very special because you got to name them, and 3 special names which are close to your heart. But what was special or different or challenging about this adventure that was not there in the other adventures?
Well, it was a very beautiful mountain range. It's called the Ellsworth Mountain Range, and lies in a very, very remote location. You have to take a very special plane called the Illusion, which is a military plane that lands on an ice runway. And from there, you have to take a fixed wing plane that puts you somewhere where you start to, be able to attack like these mountains and climb them. The type of climbing that you do is quite technical. So you're climbing you have to first approach the mountains by a ski-doo, and then you get off the ski-doo and you ski to the foot of the mountain, cross-country ski, and then you drop the skis, you take your ice axes and you start climbing. You summit the mountain, come back down, put the ice axes back, get on the skis, get on the ski, and you're back at camp. And then the next day you're coming and doing it all again in a different place. So we'd wake up that morning and look at a map, look at the horizon and say, right, that mountain looks amazing. Has it been climbed? We go back to our books, realize that mountain hasn't been climbed. So we make it the target for tomorrow's or that day's endeavor. So the purity of it, and the idea that you have that sense of freedom. I think travel is so much linked to being free. I think that's one of the main reasons why people want to backpack or travel the world in that way. And so for me, that was like the epitome of these values.
Yeah, it's a fascinating journey. And I'm sure the purity, like you said, the purity of nature over there, it's untouched and probably unseen because it was, climbed by you for the first time. But that's really an incredible adventure that you were on. But now let's also now talk about a little bit about your Netflix film, Beyond the Raging Sea, which was an incredible but yet harrowing experience in a way. You and Omar Noor set out to row 3,000 nautical miles across the Atlantic. And after 9 days, your boat capsized and you were caught in a brutal storm and leaving you fighting for survival really for 13 hours. What was really going on in your mind during that period of time when you knew that it was pretty much a life and death situation?
In the beginning, nothing except our own survival. I think for 13 hours it lasted, where we were trying to fight for our lives. I think it was only until the last moment, I'm talking about the last 5 seconds or 15 seconds, that I thought about something else. Other than that, I was purely focused on the...
You mentioned something interesting, you fighting for our lives for those 13 hours. And, we know that the Atlantic harbors some of the most dangerous waters. What was your experience? What kind of waves are we talking about? What was it like during that time? Obviously the waters, the sea life. What are the dangers that you saw coming towards you?
Sure. I mean, this was an Atlantic storm. And the Atlantic is already known for very big swells. And we were talking, there was a storm about 45, 50 knot winds. That's probably about 70, 80 kilometers an hour. We were talking about 8-meter waves. The temperature of the water was maybe minus 17 degrees Celsius. Sure, I mean, you can hang around in that kind of water for a couple of hours, but if you stay very long, you get hypothermia, you could die. We didn't really think about it at the time, but looking back, looking at where we were, this was great white sort of hunting territory. So just potentially just a few meters under our feet was, some of the biggest predators in the world. So it was a pretty harrowing situation all around. So if that vessel wasn't there, if the rescue attempt hadn't succeeded, and it failed a bunch of times before it succeeded, we would have been done for.
Wow. I find very interesting about you as a person is that you really draw deep life lessons from the experiences and explorations that you have. And something I know which is very close to your heart, that the journeys that you took post your wife's demise, was it like, did you find that the world around you kind of supported, it could be various different places, supported you in different ways to kind of not come over it, but for you to be able to deal with the trauma that you were going on at the time? Like different places did different things to you? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, nature was always a refuge for me, or a sanctuary. I always sought refuge in nature.
But is there a particular adventure which kind of really comes to your mind that healed you in a bigger way than any other adventure, or a place that perhaps healed you in a very specific way, something that you needed at that point in time?
My journey to the North Pole. One, I was somehow had this kind of false confidence having done the South Pole and thought the North Pole would be a breeze. I didn't realize that the Arctic is so much more dangerous than Antarctica and provided a completely different challenge. But also, I had a keepsake with me, which was this little toy Smurf that was the first gift that my late wife Marwa had given me, and it became like a companion for me. And I would carry it in my pocket with its head sticking out. And I lost it on that first day in the storm, and I only realized when I got into the tent.
Yeah.
And I became really distraught, and I ran out to the guide and basically said that I'm going out into the storm. It was a whiteout, into the storm to look for it. And of course, in the Arctic, you're walking on solid ground, but it's only 30 centimeters of ice. Under it is 3 kilometers of freezing Arctic Ocean. And sometimes the ice splits, creates these leads, and you can be separated from your team, and then you're done for. And I ended up going out to look for it, but very quickly I realized that this was never going to happen, and I really broke down. And what I had done, this was in 2015. My wife had passed away in 2013, and what I'd done in those 2 intervening years is somehow gotten myself psychologically to a place of like, I've lost so much if I haven't lost everything. And then when I lost it there in this really desolate environment, in this very difficult day, I started experiencing the same level of pain that I experienced on the day she passed. So yeah, that was definitely one of the most difficult experiences. But that night, probably crying into my sleeping bag, I had this kind of epiphany, which was for now I have my journey and she has hers. And I had this beautiful moment when we finally reached the North Pole. And when you get to the North Pole, you don't know it's the North Pole because there is nothing there. It's because you're on a frozen ocean. So there's not even a pole at the pole, it's just completely empty. And when I got there, we just, the only way to know you got there is that you look at your GPS and it says 90000, which is the 90th degree. And so when we got there, the sun parted and this beam of sun ray just kind of came down on us. It lit maybe a few meters around us, and to a point where I could still see the shade far away. And it was a beautiful moment experienced. And for me, it was kind of like a message from above, that I'd sort of learned this valuable lesson. It was a message of letting go. It inspired me to then go off and share, and that was the beginning of the healing path.
That's beautiful. So you found your first healing probably in the North Pole.
Yeah,
that's incredible. Now, while Guanabana, your travel adventure company, it is the first carbon neutral travel adventure company in the Middle East and North Africa, you have led expeditions worldwide, but what I'm really curious to know is the trails that you're developing in Saudi at the moment, because Saudi is pretty much, uncharted territory as far as outdoors sea activities are concerned. So give us a glimpse into, that experience and how it was like creating these trails in Saudi.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this company was started in 2009, so quite a long time ago. It was probably the first sort of trekking, climbing company in the Middle East. In 2019, having so much experience with trails all around the world, we were approached by the Red Sea Development Company, and then later on NEOM, and then later El Ola, to develop hiking trails. And what we mean by that is literally going to hundreds of kilometers of uncharted territory to scout it, to map it. It's going historically into those areas, what happened hundreds and thousands of years ago. And so while people are hiking these trails, they're essentially traveling through time, and they're getting to learn about the history of the place.
So which one do you think is the most historic trail that you've developed right now in Saudi?
I would say they're very different. So for example, the NEOM area is, if you're talking about like vast lands that have, people will be very surprised, there are volcanoes there are massive like cave systems. some of the visuals that we've seen in Saudi, trekking in these places and exploring these places, look astonishing. There's a particular place in my mind that visited in the spring, has all of these wild flowers in this very kind of rugged, mountainous terrain. It looks like if you just took a snapshot and asked someone, where do you think it is? Most people would think it's in Iceland, for example.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I expect people to be really kind of surprised in the near future when they start to see these things come to light.
Okay. So now you've just spoken about Saudi, and of course, I think there is a lot to talk about, because it's a huge, area of land, and there is so much happening at the moment. But staying in the Middle East, now we know that, a lot of people out there in the Western world and otherwise are perhaps intimidated to come to this part of the world. And as an Arab, and having traveled around so much around the world, and obviously within the region, which area in the Arab world do you think is highly underrated?
I would say Egypt. I know Egypt is I can be a little bit biased, obviously, as an Egyptian. However, people mostly know Egypt for the traditional things. But also what people don't really know and hasn't been as kind of explored and entertained is the nature tourism. So you have many, many things, but just to focus on one thing, the Sinai Peninsula is stunning. I don't think there's many places in the world that I've seen that have this kind of natural beauty and diversity concentrated in one area. But what you also have, other than the landscapes and so on, you have a very rich Bedouin culture and heritage. People who, especially in the southern Sinai, have been working in tourism actively in a very authentic way for maybe 50 years or more. So even before tourism ever became a thing, they were essentially doing tourism, in back in what it was in those days. One of the projects that we worked on that I have running right now is called Badu, and the interesting thing about it, it's a glamp in the middle of the desert in a very remote place, to the point that where actually there is no cell reception there, and we're talking about four tents with glamping kind of style, with maybe a capacity of like 12 people. But what's really unique here is that this project was done in partnership with the Bedouins. So the Bedouins are we partnered with them. They are 50% owners of the project. But it's very rare where people do what is essentially is really pure community tourism, which is we're going into a project hand in hand as partners, where really the local community is really empowered.
And you're also gaining from their experiences. So it's pretty much experiential travel in that
Absolutely.
way.
I mean, without them, the experience is hollow.
Yeah.
And
so there's still a lot to be explored in Egypt, you would say, and still very unexplored.
Absolutely.
In a way.
Yeah.
That's a good one, because you said Egypt and you're saying because a lot of people, and I wouldn't have known this if it wasn't for you. So Thank you for that. Now, coming back to your adventures again, very intrigued about the recent one that you did, which is the Darkness Retreat.
Yes.
Why did you feel the need to disconnect from the world in such an extreme way? And tell us about the retreat. What was it like?
I came across this Darkness Retreat from someone, and it intrigued me. And it ended up being one of the most profound, most beautiful experiences of my life. So
what was the retreat really like? Because I'm sure a lot of listeners out there do not know what a Darkness Retreat is.
I think a retreat is kind of, it's
the wrong
it's
word.
A bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they call it. But it's essentially you on your own in a cave, in my case, for a week.
Okay. All alone inside.
All alone. And there is no distraction, so you can't play music. You can obviously it's so dark that you can't even see your hand in front of you. So it's just you and yourself. And what you're invited to do is not look at it as a challenge or something to overcome, but something to surrender into. And what happens is then you develop a very intimate relationship with your body. So it's not actually a spiritual experience; it's more of a body experience. It was very, very profound, and I think the moment of getting out of the cave. Oh, first of all, it's strange, but you don't want to leave. And then
really, after 7 days in the darkness, you didn't want to leave?
It just became such a place that embraced me, and it was such a tender, soft belonging to be there. And so,
where was this?
This was in Oregon, in a place called Ashland.
Okay. And
it's this multi-acre kind of property in the forest where this guy built these 3 caves into the ground. When I booked it, there was a year and a half waiting list.
Wow. So there are many people like
there are
you out
many
there
crazy people who want to do these
who
things.
are going to do this. But that is incredible, like living just with yourself.
Yeah.
And, maybe that was a huge connection with your own, like you said, was a very body experience. So, coming back to adventure now, because obviously you have been around the world so much, but physically, if you because you keep going back, physically, what I mean is geographically, which part of the world do you find extremely fascinating and you yearn to go back to?
It's always been Nepal, Peru, and Antarctica and Argentina. I think the common thing between these places is they all have beautiful mountains and beautiful people that are just kind-hearted and simple. I feel I really gravitate towards mountain people because they have this, they embody the same energy, and mountains are actually like mirrors. So when you're in the mountains, that's why people, when they spend a lot of the time in the mountains, they come with a heightened sense of clarity. It's because this reflects a lot of what you're going through, and it gives you time to be able to process it.
Right. So you find Nepal and Peru very, very inspiring and
it's places
attractive.
That I've continued to come back. So I've been to Nepal maybe more than 20 times and Peru more than 10 times and so on. Because I realized that it's not really about taking kind of, countries off a list. It was more like, now that I'd been to these places and fell in love with it, I wanted to go back because I'd connected with the people and had so many friends and wanted to go deeper and deeper into those cultures.
Now, obviously adventure runs in your veins, and you, like we said, we very briefly said that you were training to become an astronaut. And I wanted to talk a little bit about space travel because that's been touted as the next big leap in travel. How do you think space travel is going to develop in the next 5 to 10 years? How do you see that industry developing?
So I think it's starting with those commercial space expeditions. These are suborbital flights where people fly for a number of minutes up over 100 kilometers, which is something known as the Kármán line, which is the imaginary line that separates sort of Earth from space. And it's a very short experience. It may cost you something like, I don't know, $200,000 to $300,000 to go on one of those few-minute suborbital flights. To go and spend 2 weeks at the International Space Station might cost you $20 to $30 million.
Right.
It's for a very, very niche kind of audience. You need to have a lot of money to do it.
I mean, I don't want to spark any controversy here, but I just don't understand the amount of money that we spend on space travel when we are not even taking care of the world we live in. Which needs like urgent attention with with global warming, etc., etc. I mean, the list is endless.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think my fascination with space is still there. I would, if I'm given the opportunity to go on a space mission, I would like it to have some other component that's not just tourism.
The scope is endless. Coming back to Earth and coming back to adventure. This year, of course, travel is going through a huge transformation this year. 2025 has been also called as the last normal year. AI is coming in force, but people are wanting more and more experiential travel, transformational travel, traveling with purpose. A lot of adventurers are out there seeking new places, but somebody who's gone on crazy, amazing adventures, if I may say so, which countries and destinations do you think are going to be the next big stars in the coming years?
Interesting question. I think the if we're talking about outdoor and adventure, since that's kind of my domain, I would say that the Middle East, places like Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the Middle East really stands out as a really kind of exotic kind of frontier destination in terms of adventure.
Okay.
But I think in general, people are, like you mentioned, people are looking more for authenticity.
Right.
And they're looking more for simplicity.
Yeah. But you're saying the Middle East is going to kind of attract a lot of
The Middle East is definitely on that list. If I had to pick one other country outside of the Middle East, I would say Mongolia.
Okay.
And actually, I haven't led a trip myself for a couple of years, but this year, the only trip that I will lead will be to Mongolia. And the reason for that is it is the only one of the only few left truly nomadic cultures in the world. Actually, within Mongolia, in the government, it is legislated that you can be nomadic, which means you are able to live somewhere, use kind of utilize the land and graze and do everything that you need to do, and then move to another place and so on. And I think about 20-30% of the population live that way. And so it's going to be really interesting for people to go and spend some time with cultures and people who still have this connection with the lands,
right?
And because it is healing, and there's a lot of that we can learn from that.
Are you leading that expedition this year?
Yes.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Okay,
it's going to be like a special experience for about 8 to 12 people.
Okay.
It's going to be an overland journey in 4x4 cars where people are driving the cars themselves. The cars are going to be outfitted with, camping gear and so on. We're going to have our own guides and chefs and things. And it's this.
So it's a proper expedition.
It's a proper expedition. So you're being able to offer people comfort, but you're also offering it in an very intrepid kind of experience where they really feel that they're doing something that's like once in a lifetime. And
coming from somebody who is doing it himself or herself is so much more credible than perhaps reading it somewhere and then booking it, So
yeah,
that credibility is really great to have. Now, on a lighter note, we want to know, what is your hidden gem?
My family and I were going to Greenland because I have a friend who runs a beautiful glamp in a very remote place.
In Greenland?
But we ended up getting to Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland, and we were supposed to take a flight to Greenland, but the flight kept getting cancelled, and we were about to lose the entire trip. And so we decided to we went to a bookstore and bought a guide of Iceland.
Okay.
And we ended up going on this, they called it the Golden Circle, and we ended up traveling, booking a camper van and traveling across Iceland in about a week in a camper van. And the beautiful thing about Iceland is that literally there's a campsite in every 100 kilometers or so.
Away.
And the nature there is so spectacular. So we went from seeing, glaciers and seals to seeing fantastic kind of massive waterfalls with sort of rainbows everywhere, to geysers, to really interesting things. But again, the idea of having agency, of driving your own car, deciding at the end every day where you're gonna stop, where you're gonna charting the route. Like really, I think travel has gotten to a place where it became so dogmatic that you're just sitting in the driving seat and you're just being told what to do and everything like that. It's not. I'm not saying you're going to go do this in Kazakhstan, which would be more wild, more intense, more this. But maybe that's for a more seasoned traveler. But that's something you can do right away.
Yeah. So the experiences in Iceland are kind of hidden gems for you. What you found because you were in a camper van. So for all those listening, hire a camper van in Iceland. Go around the Golden Circle. And experience all that nature has to offer, right? So now we almost come to the end of the podcast, but before you go away, we want to know what's next on your bucket list. What are the next adventures that you're going to go on? We know you're going to Mongolia.
Yeah.
What are the other amazing adventures that you're going to go on?
Well, Mongolia is obviously like a really big one this year. The other one is actually going back to Nepal for the 25th time. So it's not necessarily a new journey, but I plan to... For the 25th
time?
Yes. But
that's reason to celebrate.
Yeah. And but this time I plan to go with my daughter.
Okay.
Her mother and I had gone to Nepal, and we did a beautiful trip, back in 2012 where we hiked to Everest Base Camp together. I've always told her about this trip, and so she's really keen to see it. And the other thing is, which goes back to what we've been talking about in the essence of travel, is because I've been back to 25 times. In some ways I know Nepal better than I know Egypt in some capacities in some certain things. And I think there's something really beautiful about Nepal, especially is because people truly, they truly understand simplicity. Life doesn't have to be full of so many things for it to be interesting. And, I really always love to go back there because life really slows down.
Yeah. And going back with your daughter would be special.
Yeah, it's really special. So hopefully I can do that this year as well.
So there's Nepal and Mongolia, which are the top ones on your list right now.
Yeah. And then of course, if I ever get an opportunity to go back to Antarctica, I'll take it in a heartbeat. And then if someone ever wants to send me to space, I'm in.
And discover more mountains in Antarctica.
Yeah.
Okay, and then space. Okay, that's quite a bit.
Not all this year, but I mean,
yeah. Okay,
certainly at
all
least
the
one of
very
them.
best, and thank you so much. That was an incredible journey to, going to on all these journeys with you, going to these incredible places with you. The connect that you have with nature and the explorations that you have, and you find meaning in everything that you do. I think that's incredible. All the best in
Thank you.
everything that you do, and please keep doing the amazing work that you do. Thank you so much once
Thank
again,
you.
Omar, for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Moush. I really appreciate it. And
Thank you.
yeah, hopefully I'll be back sometime soon.
Yeah, for sure. I'm looking forward to Mongolia with you.
Yes, I'll let you know.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope our conversations have fueled your wanderlust and inspired you to explore the world in new and exciting ways. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And until next time, safe travels and keep adventuring.